Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Brass Junkies. I am your host, Andrew Hitz, and I am joined by my co-host, my cohort, my colleague, my friend, Lance LaDuke. Lance, how are you?
You know, I just feel so lucky, Andrew, that we have a producer named Will Houchin who's so dedicated to craft. He rolls with the punches. If there's technical issues, he never complains about it. He's just awesome.
We're giving him 48 hours to put this together when he's like enrolled in like crash course grad school over the summer. And we recorded this interview with David Gordon in 3 chunks because the thing kept falling apart. So Will, we love you. There you go. There you have it. How about that?
But I mean, from my
as I just said, this interview is with David Gordon, the principal trumpet of the Seattle Symphony.
Mm-hmm.
David and I go back to when we were both nobodies, and I still am. But David is now an important trumpet player in that. But he actually is.
Okay.
You know, every once in a while there's one that actually is. Yeah, that's him. Principal in Grant Park, principal in Seattle. He's a big deal, man.
Wow.
He's an industry unto himself.
What are you talking to us for?
Because he and I have known each other since we were little kids. So that's he felt obligated.
All right, fair
enough. Yes. So what a conversation with him. Great.
That was awesome. Really good. He's a no-nonsense player and a hilarious person. So that was
yes.
Nice to talk to him.
Yeah, both of those things have always been true. So yeah, he's a couple years younger than me, and he was from Rhode Island, so I didn't know him from and not really very much further from Boston than me, but I didn't know him from districts or Allstate or anything like that. And then he showed up at Gypso and was like, "Holy crap, who's this kid?" So he's been great since the day I met him.
Well, it's cool. We got into the Boston thing too. We keep ending up mentioning Boston in a lot of episodes, so we ended up going down that road a little bit. So hope you find that interesting as I did.
Yeah. Yep, indeed. I'm sitting here right now in Boston, which is probably why I sound just a little more articulate than usual. It's because of all the colleges that he talked about being here. So I don't even know what the hell you're singing.
Because we're the pirates who don't do anything. We just lay around. I can't remember all the words, but that was from my kids' childhood, and now it's yours.
Who do I bill for the last 15 seconds of my life?
We don't do anything.
I expected you to say it was from some famous musical.
Barbara, Manatee, 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 you are the one for me. It's VeggieTales. That's what it was. I couldn't.
There you go. All right.
Larry and Bob.
So
you know what that reminds me of? The really nice Pappert people. We got to thank those people because they are sponsors of the show, and we couldn't be more delighted that is the case. So if you're interested in finding out what's going on at the Duquesne University School of Music, the Mary Pappert School of Music, you can follow the link in the show notes. And very, very special thanks to Jim, Barbara Manatee Nova. No? Jim, what? Where is my hairbrush Nova? For making that sponsorship possible.
This thing's getting weirder with every episode that goes by. I really don't know where we're headed. And I don't just mean the gym thing. All right. We also want to thank Parker Mouthpieces for providing the hosting for the Brass Junkies. Yeah. Parker Mouthpieces offers fine, customizable component mouthpieces for horn, trombone, euphonium, and tuba, including the Andrew Hitz Artist model tuba mouthpiece and the Lance LaDuke model euphonium mouthpiece. You can find out more at parkermouthpieces.com or follow them on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So
does he sell Zerusophone mouthpieces, Michael Parker?
Sure.
We should have.
Yeah, we need
ask. Hey, Zerusophone mouthpieces. I think he makes those, doesn't he? A couple
I think he does too. But he has requested that you email him through the website to get specifics. So if everyone,
fair enough.
So if everyone can go to parkermouthpieces.com, click on the contact link, and then email Michael. It's his poor wife who gets the emails, but she is nice.
Dang.
Yeah,
sorry.
But you should email and ask. So thank you to all of our Patreon people. The bonus episode that we just recorded with Mr. David Gordon was freaking hilarious. So yeah, David told a hilarious story. Lance told a hilarious story, and then I told an all-timer, which actually I didn't even realize involved you. I'd never actually heard the tail end of that. So,
and it's actually, it details the day that Andrew and I met. So if you want to know that story, you have to join us on Patreon.
And it involved Sam Palafian getting kind of gangster on somebody, and a
roll of masking tape.
And a roll of masking tape. True story. So, if you become a patron, even for $1 per episode, then you will gain access to bonus episodes. So this is every other week, as you know, and in the intervening weeks, we always have a bonus episode where we do just a little bit more, which usually gets even crazier than the actual interview. And David did not disappoint. So you instantly get access to all of the back bonus episodes. So if you would like to hear a little bit more from them, and then Lance and I chew the fat a little bit on the interview itself and talk about our thoughts, etc. So you can do that by going to patreon.com/thebrassjunkies. And then the last thing, before I actually get serious for a moment, is that thank you to everybody who has gone to iTunes and left a rating, a review, who's subscribed, and extra special thanks to anyone who has shared this. That's awesome. Anybody that shared an episode with somebody who you think might dig it, that's easily the best way for us to get spread far and wide, is for people who are already fans to speak up. So thank you to all of you for that. And I wanted to take just a moment. I am actually at my parents' house right now in Sudbury, Massachusetts, where I grew up. And the reason I'm here and not in the Berkshires is a sad one, and that is because the gentleman who first handed me a tuba, his name was Bob Mealy. Mr. Mealy, as I knew him, he ended up getting his PhD in music ed later on, but I never could call him Dr. Mealy. He was always Mr. Mealy to me. But he actually just passed away this past week. He was only 58 years old.
Whoa.
And he had been fighting major health problems for a long time, like talking 20 years, to the point where his wife actually donated a kidney to him a number of years ago. And there were times in those 20 years when his health was doing really well. But he always kind of had a narrow margin for error, and he just got an infection that he just could not kick, and then got the really bad news a few days ago. So, but man, what a selfless human. It's funny how when you're in fourth grade, when I was 9, I had no idea how young he was. I mean, he was 24, and like he was Mr. Mealy to me. He could have been 44 for all I knew. I mean, I didn't realize that it was like his second year of teaching. But he taught me, and back then you could actually teach privately one of your own students, which nowadays you probably get sued out of existence if you did that. But he taught me privately for 2 years, and then completely on his own pulled my parents aside. He was a trumpet player, and he said, I've taught him everything that I can, and he needs to be studying with a low brass person. And so he gave up income, and he was young. I'm sure he needed the money, but he was just like that kind of guy. But he fought like hell to keep music in the schools here, and just an amazing human being. And I was honored to be able to play it he just retired last year. And so I was able to play at his retirement party. But man, the number of lives that he changed, in Sudbury public schools, via being an amazing band director. So he's dearly missed. I'm going to his wake tomorrow and his funeral on Monday. So sorry to bring things down.
No.
And then there'll be an awkward segue because we hit the ground running with David, and it's and so we talk about Mark Gould right away in the David interview. So yeah, but we specialize in awkward segues.
Well, and here's the bridge. I mean, this David goes on about his teachers and the influence of his teachers, and I just came back from the American Band College, where it's a whole. There's 200-300 teachers of young music students, and the impact that you music teachers who are listening right now. And everybody who's listening right now has had a music teacher in their life who has changed the trajectory of their life, and so it's an honor that we get to spend time with them when we do, and so we just have to celebrate it as we can.
Yeah, right on. Yep, right on. So. But yeah, it's also one of those, I mean, this is so cliche, but it's like, if somebody has had as big of an influence on your life and your career as Mr. Mealy had on mine, like tell them today. It's such a cliche, but it's like, tell them today. And it's kind of nice because his retirement party was last year. I was able to tell him in front of a room of 100 family and coworkers, and friends of his, which was great. And he and I had talked about that stuff in the past, and he had talked about how proud he was of me and a whole bunch. And he got to see me play with Dallas Brass, and then got to see me play with Boston Brass. So it was great. But it's just, it's one of those where if I hadn't had the chance, man, I'd be kicking myself.
Mm-hmm.
So, sometimes those chances find you, like this retirement party, and other times you kind of got to create them. So there's my unsolicited life coach advice for all of you. Is just do it. Nobody is going to be upset that you reach out with that information. So, So with that downer of a note, let's get into our conversation with one of the best trumpet players in the world, and they all think that, but this one actually qualifies. So yeah, we've had some, again, Jeff Strong, like we've had, and we won't spoil because actually we don't even know whether she went the last week.
Right. Yeah.
We're going to go next week. So I'm not going to say who it was. It's because there are some moving parts here.
We're teeing up some trumpets. We were in a drought for a little bit, but we've got some really solid.
I'll say so, and we've got some other ones who are we're just trying to figure out the schedule. The problem is that when you try and get someone like David Gordon pinned down with people with the two of us and like line up those three schedules, that's hard to do. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's like, oh, good, your season's over, so your schedule's probably freeing up. It's like, no, actually, in the morning I'm flying to Chicago and I'm playing Principal in Grant Park all summer. It's like, well, of course you are. You're David Gordon. So, but yeah, I think you're going to really enjoy this conversation with David Gordon. And so, without further ado, let's get to it. Today on the Brass Junkies, we are joined by a very old friend of mine. I don't mean that he's old. I just mean that I've been friends with him for a very long time. He is the principal trumpet, which is important. It's shocking that he has actually grown up to become somebody, but he is the principal trumpet of the Seattle Symphony, and his name is David Gordon. David, how are you?
Very well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you must be honored.
I am absolutely honored. As a matter of fact, I'm going to have to rewrite my bio in terms of career highlights. But no, I'm psyched. It's great to talk to you guys.
Podcast interview with one of your jackass high school friends and a quote-unquote famous euphonium player. So
absolutely, man. That's like a trombone player with a cell phone. I mean,
oh goodness! So David and I played together in the Greater Boston Youth Symphony Orchestra way back in the day. When you grew up in Rhode Island, right?
Yep, I grew up in Rhode Island. I first met you in 1992, and our first concert together was Mahler's Second Symphony in Symphony Hall, Boston.
And you were wearing blue.
Absolutely. I remember. Do you guys have like a Romeo and Juliet track that we can play over this? Oh.
You'll have to imagine.
So the difference between you and me was that was the highlight of my career, and you've just continued to ascend.
Whatever. That was a pretty seminal concert, I think, for everybody who was involved in it. I mean, there were a lot of people who've gone on to pretty real careers who played that concert. So it was a pretty inspirational thing.
I don't know. Colin Williams is pretty overrated.
Yeah, he can't really play. I mean, Jessica Phillips doesn't have a good job either. But,
no, the Met in general is overrated. So it's not that hard to win a job there. So since it's screened all the way through, you can totally trick your way into a way that's the opposite of that. So there's a few people there. You're right. The way that you just described that. I mean, if that makes my top 10 concerts ever list, and I think pretty easily. I mean, it was
for sure.
Yeah, it was a lot
absolutely
of fun.
And in terms of influence as well, that was one of those very lucky experiences for everybody who was involved that sort of gives you the why as well as the what about this thing that we do. And I felt really fortunate to have something like that at such an early age.
Wow, look at you taking it serious. And that was poignant.
Like the most serious podcast I ever heard.
I don't know if I'm going to be able to keep going.
Wow. The why, and see, we interviewed Gould like 2 full months ago, and we're still recovering. So
there you
go. We
the first time I met Mark Gould, his closing line to me was, "You know what? You're a stupid fuck," and then he walked away, and I didn't see him for like 3 months after that. But that's Mark Gould. So,
oh man.
That means he likes you. He doesn't. Yeah, he doesn't.
Absolutely. We always got on very well. But
in case you were curious, I'm setting the rating to explicit as we speak.
sorry about that.
No, you're all good.
Edit that out.
Let people know. No.
No, you were talking about like poignant and seminal high school musical experiences that gave you your why, and then I brought up Gould. So it's like, I'm the one that brought us there.
All right, there you go.
We're going to go past seminal high school experiences twice and not comment on it. We're just going to leave that.
All right.
Keep driving. Nothing to see here. Move along.
No. Move along.
So why don't you tell the people where you went after high school?
After high school, I went to school in New York. I did a double program with Columbia and Juilliard. My degree is actually academic. The joke in my family was that if I wanted to be a professional musician, I had to study something even practically more useless than trumpet playing. So I chose philosophy, which, it was interesting. No, actually, it was great. It was a great experience, and I was very lucky to be part of that. And then after...
I don't think I knew that. That's cool.
Yeah. And then at the end of, in April of my senior year, I became the principal trumpet of the Charleston Symphony in South Carolina. And that season, I also won the principal job here in Grant Park, where I still am. And then 3 years later, I became the principal in the Seattle Symphony.
So you were a real slow starter.
A lot of luck and, a little bit of more luck. I don't know,
Yeah, it was really luck.
So that Mahler 2 concert with me really propelled you forward. That's
that was it, man. I owe it all to you. It was the tuba part of the chorale in the last movement of Mahler 2.
Hell yeah, man! It inspired a lot of us.
That sure did.
Wow! So you won 3 auditions. I mean, you basically won 2 of them while you were still in school, and then you won another one. And those are big auditions, and they're principal auditions. So how did you have that kind of... Now, you played the shit out of the trumpet from the day I met you, so I'm not surprised on that level. But I mean, auditions, well, maybe you don't because all you do is win them. But auditions are a real tricky beast, right? I mean, there's a lot that goes into it other than just playing the shit out of the trumpet. So why do you think that you were able to have that much success at such an early age?
I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of it, some of it is luck. Some of it is personality. I was very fortunate to have great teachers very young, and teachers who not only, my first teacher was a guy named Nato Pandolfi. His son, Jim Pandolfi, was a colleague of Mark Gould's in the Met, and there are Pandolfis all over. His brother was Roland Pandolfi, principal horn in St. Louis for many years. Two of his other sons are horn players, big family. But, here was a guy who was a music teacher in rural Rhode Island and who has students in big orchestras all over the world. So right. I owe a huge debt of gratitude to my good fortune of having found such an incredible teacher at such a young age. I don't think there's any real secret to auditions. I think, you go out and play the best that you can. And I think in a way I was very fortunate to have had the opportunities that I had when I was young. It's easy to walk into an audition as nobody with nothing to lose and go in and do your thing. So I wish I could say there was some secret to it. It sort of amazes me now seeing how unbelievably methodical people are in preparing for auditions, recording and listening back at, quarter speed and that whole routine. I think, I was very lucky as well to be in school with a lot of amazing colleagues. I had incredible influences in addition to my teachers. Some of my classmates, Billy Hunter, Balazs Nemes, Jack Suddy, Kevin Finnemore, guys, Mark Inouye had just left New York. There were all these guys who were just amazing players. So I think I was just really fortunate to have had all these sorts of influences that, bleed into your playing.
What did Pandolfi, what was so great about studying with him?
NATO or Jim? I actually studied with both.
There you go. Well, no, Jim is one of my old friends, and I hate it when people say nice things about him. So let's go with Dad first.
All right, Dad. We're not going to talk about the big blind asshole, but I would never actually call him that. He was an incredible influence on me, but that's what everybody else calls him. No. NATO was funny because physically he's totally the opposite of Jim. He was this diminutive little Italian guy with a very high, scratchy voice. Yeah, absolutely. But he was the quintessential old school teacher. I first came to him because I got in the youth orchestra in Rhode Island, and you had to have a private teacher, and I didn't have one yet. So, I was lucky enough that he accepted me as a student. And my first lesson, he sat me down and he said, I didn't accept you as a student because you sound good, because really you don't, and I don't do this for the money, and I don't need to do this. So I took you because I thought you might have some potential. And I have to tell you that if either you don't work as hard as I think you should work, or I was just wrong and you don't have the potential that I thought you might have, I'll throw you out of my studio immediately because I'm too old to do this and I don't want to waste my life on people like that.
I love it.
So man. I went to every lesson from the age of 12 in total fear. This guy, he was very much Italian in the sense of Toscanini. He would get up in your face and get angry and scream at you and turn red and shake, and it was personal. But at the same time, he was totally invested in his students. He was the kind of teacher who would make you great or make you quit. And, he was part of a long line of amazing pedagogy. He had studied with George Mager and Marcel LaFosse in Boston, which is a legacy of trumpet playing that goes all the way back to Arbin. So really just an amazing source of knowledge, and the kind of person who really could set you up properly. And also the kind of person who instilled the idea that if you were going to do it, you absolutely had to do it properly, and you had to do it like it mattered, and you had to really give everything that you had. So no, I think that was, in that way I was lucky. I got life lessons that, a lot of people don't run into until they're much older. And I sort of got hit in the face by a brick wall with it, but it was at a very young age, and I was really fortunate to do that. It was also, I was very lucky because he was very well known within the industry. My last year of high school, I went to New York every couple of weeks for lessons with William Vacchiano, because NATO had sent many students through Vacchiano over the years. So, wow. I was sort of in this pipeline of people who really knew what was what. So that was another very, very fortunate thing about my upbringing.
Wow.
When you're 12, how do you not collapse? What's going through your mind? Just don't freak out, practice. How do you gear up for that?
Yeah, basically. I think that's I think you have to have a certain personality to study with teachers like that. And I was lucky to be, enough of a hard head that I felt like, okay, I guess it's a combination of resilience and maybe a little ego, thinking you can deal with that. But you just sort of work through it. It never occurred to me that I could do anything other than try and get what this guy wanted. I knew who he was. I knew where his students were. I knew about his legacy. And I felt like, well, okay, if I really want to do this, I didn't know any better. I thought this is what it takes. I just got to get through this.
Well, and let's hang there a second. So what was it about playing the trumpet? I mean, why not soccer or cooking or something else? Like, why was this the thing that you decided I'm going to go all in on this at such an early age?
It's funny. I probably, right when I first studied with him, I don't think I'd gotten to that point yet. But I got to that point pretty early. I mean, probably when I was 13 or 14, that I really wanted to give this a go, and I knew what the music, again, very fortunately, I knew what the music business was. I knew no matter how good you are, there's no guarantee that you're going to make it, but I felt like I really wanted to give it a go. I think it was a combination of things. I mean, maybe the first thing that made me want to play the trumpet was hearing recordings of Phil Smith playing in the New York Philharmonic, hearing those famous trumpet recordings. There's a Copland 3 in Quiet City with Bernstein. There's a couple of Mahler symphonies, 3 and 7, especially also with Bernstein. There's the famous Mahler 5 with Maida, which I'd probably listened to 10,000 times before I got to college.
Amen.
And there was something about that to me at that time, it really jumped out at me. And I thought, wow, that's first of all different than anything else I hear. And it was really special and it was really compelling. And I thought, like, what is that? That's incredible. I want to do that. I want to figure out what that is and be a part of that. And then I was lucky enough to have a lot of really great musical experiences to further that whole idea of this thing that I wanted to be a part of. We joke about that Mahler 2 performance, but that Mahler 2 performance and many of the people I met playing in youth orchestras in Boston, Andy and I were both very lucky. We had amazing youth orchestras full of really great players, really interesting people, and people who are really committed to doing that. And that was something I just thought was compelling. It was something that I thought was amazing and I really wanted to be a part of.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
Yeah. It's and also Jared Vermette won principal trombone in Hong Kong when he was 22. Todd Sheldrick has played in a couple of major orchestras in Portugal. I mean, like the brass section was like littered with people who have gone on to have careers, and we were all just kind of, we were young and cocky and stupid, but we were just doing our thing, and God, we were so lucky to be doing what we did together. So.
No, absolutely. I mean, I remember, I joke about that low brass chorale. I mean, hearing you guys play that thing, it was funny. I actually saw Jared in Hong Kong in December. I hadn't seen him in 15 years or something, and
right.
he's still sort of the same, but hearing these players, I hadn't run into players like that who were my age, that was the thing, like, hearing you guys practice that thing. And you must've had 180 sectionals on that chorale before the show. You were like doing it all the time, and it always sounded amazing. And first of all, hearing players that I felt like were like me, it's not like listening to, whoever,
sure.
Phil Smith or Bud Herseth or Wynton Marsalis or Maurice Andre or Håkan Hardenberger, these people who are in some way fundamentally different from a high school kid. It's like, here were high school kids doing this thing at an incredibly high level, and also showing that kind of commitment. It's easy to joke about 180 rehearsals, but in a way, that was a really fortunate thing to see, like, okay, if you want to do this on this level, this is what it takes. And here, you can watch these guys doing it right here. That was something that was really formative, and I felt fortunate to be a part of.
Okay, so here's a question, which is useful because this is a podcast. We have...
That was so smooth, Lance. I'm taking notes over here. Like
that was profound. That was up there with
get it out.
That was a seminal moment in this podcast history.
There we go.
Came up on aisle 3. So we have had multiple conversations that lots of roads lead through Boston, and they do for lots of the orchestral players we've spoken to, and lots of the chamber musicians with whom we've spoken. And granted, Andrew grew up there and was a part of a lot of these things and experienced them firsthand. And so there's probably some amount of that just because, Andrew co-hosts this and that's who we end up knowing. So here's two avenues I'd like to go down. One, what was it about there then or is? And then where is that happening now? If not in Boston, maybe it still is. Where else are there these crucibles of young players who end up with? You have this crazy amount of players who launch out into big gigs.
Oh wow!
So go in either direction. I don't care.
All right. Well, the first one first, because I think the first one's easier, and I think that's two parts. I mean, we were lucky to be part of a wave of players. As we all know, there are sort of cycles and generations of players to come through, and nobody really knows why it happens that way. There was one sort of late 70s through early 80s in Chicago, where you get Tom Rolfs and Neil Bernstein and all these amazing, I'm giving trumpet players just because I know the names.
Sure.
There was one through the mid 80s in New York where you had Dave Bilger and Mike Sachs both in the same studio at Juilliard. And we were very fortunate to be part of a wave of musicians. There was just a generation. It was a generation that for whatever reason, there were a lot of people, whether it was circumstances of jobs turning over, whether it was education, whether it was something in the water, who knows what it was, but there were just a lot of players that were coming through at that time. I remember Joe Alessi actually talking to a friend of mine at Juilliard and saying, it's really interesting to be here. This was Joe saying it was really interesting to be there at that time because there was just this whole generation of players that were coming through that were really doing well and that were coming out and, through circumstance or talent or whatever, making an impact on the industry. So that's one aspect. In terms of Boston specifically, I was sort of there, but not there. So I sort of had both an outsider and an insider's perspective. The thing that struck me about Boston, and I don't know why, my best guess is all the academia in the area, is Boston, more than maybe anywhere else I've been, especially for kids, was full of Renaissance people. There were all these people who were committed, talented, smart, wide-ranging, doing a lot of projects, and really going after stuff at a high level on many different fronts. It was funny of those youth orchestras, of the best players, maybe half of them went to top conservatories and the other half went to Harvard or MIT, of the best players in those youth orchestras. And for some reason at that time, Boston just had a lot of those people. There were people doing theater projects, visual art projects, music, experimental stuff, playing classical music at a high level, playing jazz. Just there was this atmosphere among the kids that, there was a lot of value in the journey of figuring out how far you could go, figuring out what you could do. And that was really supported in the culture. And maybe, again, it's because there are however many really amazing top flight universities there that informs sort of the intellectual culture of that city. Maybe it's something to do with density of population. I don't know. I don't know what it is, but there was something really special there that you felt like there was a freedom to really pursue things that you were passionate about. And a lot of people were doing it on a high level. In terms of where that's happening now, to be honest, I don't know because, I'm an orchestra guy, so I have to play a lot of concerts in a lot of the same places, and I don't have as much time as I wish I had to travel and to be part of a lot of the stuff. I mean, you guys probably have more perspective on that than I do because you've got so much more ability to travel and to meet people and to hear the kids and to do that. So and not to throw it back, shoot, if you guys have got ideas on where that's going on, I'd love to go there and visit.
Yeah. I think it's very different for a couple reasons. One is the internet. And so you don't have to go to a place to be exposed to a lot of these things that you're talking about. And the other is not that music festivals weren't always a key component of young players' lives, but it really I teach at Carnegie Mellon, and there's tons of it's a conservatory style training. And those students, the whole year is, it's just an exaggeration. Much of the year is taking up with, which festivals am I going to play in over the summer? So that seems to be you have the Brevard ones and the Aspen ones and the wherever ones, and so they're kind of heading off into those pockets. But I don't know that there is like a mecca for this kind of, especially a mecca for
I think I might have lost you.
brass playing at the on the orchestral side as well as the chamber side, because you had what Empire was doing in those sessions, which is all kind of going concurrent with this, and so you end up throwing these incredible players out across the quote unquote classical music genres.
Right.
So I don't know. What do you think, Andrew?
Yeah, I don't have my finger on where that is today necessarily, and I think you're right that with the internet, it really does kind of equalize things, and because of access online at this point, not that getting to sit in a room regularly with Sam Palafian and Chester Schmitz and all the things that I got to experience, just like you did, David, on the trumpet end of things. Not that that's not a massive, almost indescribable advantage over not doing those things. But I think nowadays, if you're curious, then you can really experience so much stuff. Whereas before, you had to be curious and have proximity. So I think you're right. But yeah, the Boston thing in particular, I think you just hit it, Lance. I mean, it's like the fact that I had regular exposure with both Roger Voisin in the summers at Tanglewood and Sam Palafian, and two guys who approached teaching and music completely the same way, and yet had two completely different careers, and approached music the same way, and yet taught it very differently, and different resumes, and those kind of guys were around Boston just kind of everywhere. And I was even thinking just before my time, it was like Steve Dumaine and the late great Mark Horner and Greg Harper. And I mean, like the list just goes on and on and on of brass players that came out of Boston over like about a decade long period. John Dante before that. There's a long list of players. And it's funny, when I was growing up, I kind of knew I was lucky, but I also kind of thought, well, I knew I was lucky that I got to study with all of those people. I didn't really have a firm grasp on how lucky I was to be sitting in a section with somebody like you, David, like that regularly. You know what I mean? It's like, I think that's just as abnormal of a reality as the people we got to study with, which you already very articulately said. But it's just kind of being surrounded by like-minded people who enabled me to continue to be curious, and even encouraged me to be curious in some different. Well, Todd Sheldrick, who I mentioned before, who's still one of my dear friends, he was into like Tibetan throat singers, and which for me was just completely out of left field. And then he played it for me, and it didn't turn me into a big fan of that, but I was like, holy crap, that's crazy. And it just kind of opened up this whole new side of music that I had never even known existed. And that kind of thing was kind of regular. So it was just kind of everywhere. I just kind of took it for granted, but man, do I feel lucky. So tell us about your audition for the Seattle Symphony. How old were you?
Oh God, I was 25. I actually, and full disclosure, I actually auditioned twice for the Seattle Symphony.
Really?
Yep. Yeah, the first time I auditioned, Bob Sullivan was offered the position.
He's pretty good.
Yeah, he's pretty good. And you talk about a guy with an assassin's record in auditions. He's definitely on that list of people who you don't want to see at the audition.
Right.
No, he's amazing. And he actually, he was offered that position and wound up not taking it for familial issues. And, of course, it's one of those things where you talk to people on the committee who are your colleagues years later, and they're like, yeah, it was sort of weird. If there'd been a runner-up for that audition, it probably would have been you. But, we didn't designate it. It's like, oh, thanks, guys. I'm really happy that I got the pleasure of taking another audition. But no, that was an interesting audition. That was by far the hardest audition I've ever taken, any round, no matter what. I mean, the audition that I actually won in Seattle, my final took an hour to play the list. And it was all three movements of Haydn Concerto, 27 excerpts and 14 pieces of sight reading. And when I say sight reading, one of the pieces of sight reading was the whole first movement of Varese Octandre. Another one was a French atonal polyrhythm etude. So it was like way, way, way over the top. And I don't know why that was. Maybe that was, the music director was a trumpet player, or maybe it was just a different approach to teasing out what people could do and how they do under the conditions of the job. I don't know what it was, but yeah, it was a very hard final.
So that was Gerard Schwartz, is that right?
Yeah, that was Jerry Schwartz. Jerry Schwartz hired me.
There you go.
Absolutely.
He came to Shenandoah Conservatory where I teach a few months ago. His son actually teaches cello there.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that. Cool.
Yeah, and he was in town, and so we bothered him for a masterclass, and he said, of course, and it was fantastic. But he actually talked about his audition for the New York Philharmonic, and it was very similar to what you just described. It's like playing trumpet for like 4 or 5 days.
Right? No, that makes sense.
break.
His music director was Boulez, who hired him. So I can imagine. I mean, I've played for Boulez, but never auditioned for him, and something tells me that he could probably come up with plenty of material to put you through your paces.
Right. So what was it more difficult to maintain physical endurance during that gauntlet that you ran, or mental?
For me, physical for sure. I mean, I'm just looking at it thinking, okay, I hope I can make it through this stuff. I mean, it's funny, the second time was probably harder mentally than the first time, because the first time I didn't know what was coming, and the first time was a relatively similar final. And, there were a number of pretty well-known players in that final. And, I remember sort of talking to people who at the time had much bigger jobs than me, about that. And they're sort of saying, wow, like I've never seen anything like this. I don't even know what to do. So, you're unprepared for it. You don't have time to sweat about it. You don't have time to get nervous about it. You just sort of walk out on stage and it's like, well, okay, let's, see how far I can get through this stuff.
Next.
Yeah. No, it's like, well, okay, here we go. Oh, right. And we play, Mahler 7, 48 minutes into my audition. All right. Well, we'll see how that goes. No, wow. But it was the second time probably was mentally more difficult because, at that time I had an idea of what it was going to be like. I'd already come and played a number of weeks with the orchestra. So I think even more so than the first time, I really wanted to get the job. I felt like, wow, this is a great city. This is a great orchestra. I would really love to do this, so that always adds another level of pressure. But no, I think probably it was harder physically than mentally, just to try and keep yourself in real audition A game mode under conditions, which, at least for me, I'm sure there's some people who could cruise through a list like that and it wouldn't be a big deal. But for me, that was pretty fatiguing. So
you remember, did your preparation, did you modify your preparation for the 2 auditions? Or you pretty much just sort of like, okay, we're going to go do this thing again. Got this far. I'm going to do that again.
I think I was probably more intensive about my preparation for the second audition than the first audition. And I think that actually was a real learning experience for me. It's something I learned over sort of my years of taking auditions. And unfortunately I learned it the hard way, was that there's this ethos in classical music of, the pianist or the string player practicing 12 hours a day, or the brass player practicing until your lips bleed. There's this idea that like you can't leave anything in the locker room. You got to absolutely go as hard as you possibly can. And I think especially preparing for auditions, that's not always constructive. You wind up coming in to a certain degree physically and mentally traumatized before you start. So I felt like for the first audition, I was a little bit fresher. But my preparation was definitely more exhaustive for the second one. There was a joke in my orchestra in Charleston at the time. There were a couple of particularly gnarly passages from Schoenberg Second Chamber Symphony. And, the joke when I left is it's like, yeah, now everyone in the Charleston Symphony knows every trumpet lick from Schoenberg's Second Chamber Symphony, because you've been playing them, 35 times before every service for the last 4 months.
So you say you ramped up the intensity. What is that like in tangible terms? What do you mean? Like what's that mean?
I think for me, it was just really a question of focus. I was, at the time I was trying to learn how to play a job and still prepare for an audition. I mean, now as sort of a working professional, I feel like, wow, it would be a luxury to be able to go back to school and not have playing commitments, to be able to just practice all day, every day in small blocks, spread it out, be really constructive about everything you do and not have constraints other than your own productivity. So, when I prepared for that Seattle audition, it was in the spring. We were finishing up our subscription series in Charleston and doing spring pops. So, it's like you're trying to find time during the day to really practice constructively for an audition, knowing that you're going to have to play a run out concert of 2.5 hours of big band transcriptions that night. So for me, that was really challenging. And most of it was just, luckily at the time I was young and I didn't have a family and I didn't have a lot of outside commitments. So a lot of it was just giving yourself the time to have physical and mental recovery. So, when I was preparing for that, my practice day would start first thing in the morning and would end last thing before I went to bed. Because I knew for me, I couldn't practice for 4 hours straight and wind up anything other than injured. So, I had to spread it out. So I think, in terms of ramping up, it was ramping up singularity of focus on really preparing for this audition and making sure that, every morning, you're not late to rehearsal. You're there early so that you can really warm up carefully and do all the things necessary to make sure that that day was going to be a good day. That you were disciplined about making sure you managed your time and you managed your practicing so that you could be as constructive as possible.
It kind of reminds me of when you were talking about studying with NATO, and he. This is what you have to do. You just sort of told yourself, well, if I want to do this thing, then this is the cost of doing that thing. And then did going and not getting the first round, the first time through, did that kind of trigger that same, oh, okay, well then this is the thing that I have to do? Because you say it in this kind of matter of fact way. Well, okay, I got to eat this elephant. I guess I'm just going to start at this end and work until there's no more elephant. And it's interesting to me that you had you've referred to these 2 points in your career that have that same mentality. It seems like, did it feel similar in terms of that attitude or approach?
Yeah, it's funny actually. I mean, the first audition in Seattle, I didn't walk away feeling bad about that audition. I actually felt like I played very well, and I felt like, okay, the guy who ultimately beat me in this audition, I'm sure came out and did some things that I couldn't do. And that's not to disparage my playing. I may have offered some other things, but in the context of what went on, I felt like, okay, I knew this player. He was in the New York Philharmonic when I was a student at Juilliard. I'd heard him play. I'd gone to master classes of his, and I knew that he had a particularly extraordinary thing that he could do, both as a player and maybe more remarkably in auditions. A lot of people to come in and play 100% on the audition day, as opposed to in the concert or in the practice room or whatever. That was something that, at least my understanding was, he was particularly remarkable at. So, it's not like I walked away thinking, well, I didn't do the work. I walked away thinking, well, okay, I went out and did what I did and they chose something else. I think the second time, again, the difference is, I think it's harder to audition for an orchestra where people. There's some way in which anonymity gives you strength. You can sort of go out and it's like, well, okay, here's what I have to offer. And if they like it, great. And if they don't, well, whatever, I'm never going to see them again. And so I think that extra intensity for me came from the fact that, I knew a lot of these people. I'd played with this orchestra. I thought this was something that could work out for me. So, whether that was a good or a bad thing, I'm not sure, but luckily enough for me, it all worked out. So
very cool.
So there are not many people in the world, I would say, that have played the principal seat in a section where the music director was a world-renowned player formerly on that instrument.
Yep.
So what was that like?
I've got to say, it was the kind of situation in which the vast majority of the time, Jerry could have made my life miserable. He could have made my life hell. And he didn't. He really He was straightforward about what he wanted. And actually, it cut out a lot of variables. Often there's this sort of dynamic between conductors and first trumpet players. And with Jerry, there's none of that. He'd done it. He'd sat in the chair. He knew exactly what was going on. He didn't often, brass instruments by conductors are often misunderstood. And with him, obviously, it wasn't, because he'd played at the very highest level. The flip side of that coin was when he would ask you to do something that wouldn't be your first choice, you actually really had to do it. Sometimes with conductors, there's the famous Malcolm McNabb dealing with conductors video, where you smile and nod and move around and play it exactly the same way. And they think it's great. That was absolutely not an option planned for Jerry, because, clearly he understood the instrument at the very highest level. So, you really, you had to do what he asked, and you really had to do what he asked.
I once didn't, and it was not on the level of, Seattle Symphony, but I once, I was told to play quieter twice, and I then pretended to play, and I was told perfect.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yep. I was like, right on, man. I could do that all day. Yeah. If that's all the audition is, then I could have beaten, I could have beaten Chuck. I could have beaten anybody. So yeah, bring it on at that point. But yeah, you can't get away with anything, can you?
No, it was, and he really was judicious. He never micromanaged me as a trumpet player. He wouldn't go through, and, he, like any music director, he had his things that he liked. He had his stylistic points that he liked. He'd have things that he had a strong opinion about, but he was pretty judicious. He wasn't going through editorializing everything that I had to play. So no, we generally had a good working relationship.
That's great. Yeah, I had actually often wondered that from a distance, just knowing that you were working for him, and just wondering what that must have been like. So that's good, boy. His masterclass, I was knocked out.
Really?
What
did he talk about?
He got way more than I usually do in my teaching, although this isn't that hard because I'm kind of on the other end of the thing. But he talked a lot of very technical stuff. He worked with with I think every brass instrument. There were a number of people that played for him, and he talked about some things like playing angle and that kind of thing. But it was interesting where my not when it's that guy, but like in general, when people start going way deep on that stuff, like my BS radar goes up quickly, because a lot of people that do that don't know what the hell they're talking about. And you can tell they kind of say that kind of thing to everybody, whether that's what should be said or not. But every single student he worked with got better.
Wow.
And got better in the way that he predicted it was about to happen. And he was getting super technical, and yet he explained it in a way that the player and everyone in the room understood. And he also gave his reasons, which were also understandable. So it was like, for a technical based masterclass, it was as good as I've seen, which was kind of cool.
Wow, very cool. Yeah, I never really got to pick his brain about trumpet playing, because it's like he's my boss. I can't. You couldn't really do that. But
of course,
I wished I could have sat down and talk trumpet with him. I remember asking him once about a couple of, particularly hairy concertos that he premiered and stuff like that. And he was really cool about stuff like that. But yeah, I never really got to sit down and get in the weeds about trumpet playing with him.
You don't want to take a lesson with your boss.
No, you really can't. You can't do that. And it's a shame, because here's this resource, especially having been, I feel like, we're certainly very different players. It would have been educational to get his perspective, because he obviously was a very different kind of trumpet player than I am. And I think that would be really educational, all right, what do you think about it? How do you do what you do? What is it like? How do you build, how do you establish the building blocks of your playing? What do you practice? How do you think about what you're trying to do? But Who knows, maybe someday.
But I also like what you were talking about in terms of that first audition. And this was I was thinking two things. Like when you were talking about how that Bob Sullivan, you guessed, could, did a couple things you couldn't do, and that maybe you had done things that he couldn't do, but that he had won, and it's not because of you, it was because of him and what they preferred. And I was thinking that was a really mature outlook for somebody who was only, you said that was the first time you auditioned. So what, 23, 24?
I think I was Yeah, 24, I think.
Yeah, but at the same time, I was thinking, well, that would maybe be easier to have that attitude when you've already won Charleston and Grant Park as well. That you've already had success. But like you're saying, with Schwartz and with you and with Bob Sullivan and with Roger Voisin, and I mean, once you get to the level that you and those other people are at,
I don't know if I put myself in that class, but
you're self-deprecating. Your deflecting is genuine, so I'm not annoyed by it. But you are on that level. But my point is that at that point, it's like it's a taste issue, right? I mean, it's just kind of it's what you care for, and so it's not a judgment that this that this woman or this man is better trumpet player or better musician than you. At that point, it's an opinion.
Absolutely.
And yeah,
absolutely. And there are certainly objective things. This person may have this skill that they're better at than you are, or you may have this other skill that you're better at than they are. But it's a question of priorities, and that's actually one thing. Earlier you were talking about, what do you do to win an audition? And I don't think I was aware of this when I was really taking auditions full time. But one, I think, really constructive thing that's come out of readily available technology is recording. And I'm sure you guys have heard this from a lot of other players, but it's like, if you can get yourself to a place where you're recording yourself regularly and you feel like, okay, I would hire what I'm hearing. I'm fundamentally happy with what I'm hearing. Then I think you can walk out of any audition feeling good about yourself. And most of the people who I hear from who've done that, younger players who've really gone through that process exhaustively, really the vast majority of the time they've wound up being successful. If you can sit down and just step back and listen to yourself absolutely objectively and think, okay, would I hire this player? And you can answer that question in the affirmative, then you're probably going to be totally fine.
Yeah, that's very interesting. That would you hire you? And as when I'm wearing my music business consultant hat or talking on the entrepreneurial musician, the question isn't why should someone hire you? The question is, why should someone hire you instead of everybody else? That's the other thing. So it's not just that you have to get to a certain level and then everything is cool. It's that you have to be chosen over everyone else, which is a higher standard. There are a bunch of people that could do your job in the Seattle Symphony. I'm not saying that there are tons that could do it as well as you, but there are more people that could do that job than there are who could win that job and then do it.
For sure. No, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Absolutely. No. And that's true. I mean, that's the nature of the music business.
Yes.
I mean, there's fewer jobs than there are qualified applicants,
Right.
And, we all know those people who are amazing, amazing players. And for whatever reason, it hasn't dropped for them yet.
Yeah, right on. All right. So doubling back, can you talk a little bit about studying with Jim Pandolfi?
Well, Jim was amazing. I mean, Jim probably was one of the most formative teachers for me. And I never studied with him as sort of a primary every week teacher. I played for him pretty regularly while I was in New York and actually after as well. Jim was one of those guys. There were two things that were amazing about him. The first was that he helped me do something with my sound that was something that I wanted to do but hadn't figured out how to do yet. He really understood the mechanics of making a great sound, and he could sit down and teach you on every level, from conceptual approach to breathing to oral cavity mechanics to airstream to approach, really what you had to do to make a great sound. And that was the first time I played for him, really. I mean, I played for him a couple times in high school, but the first time I played for him really was the middle of my first year in New York. And it was this total eye-opening thing. Like, he really solved a bunch of problems. And there were things that I was trying to do, but I didn't know how to do.
Right.
The other thing that was amazing about Jim is he could make you do things that you couldn't do. He's this larger than life personality. And he's an amazing musician. He's a very charismatic guy. He's also this huge, physically imposing guy. And when you went and played for him, he had the technical and musical expertise, but also the charisma and persona to really suck you into what he was doing. And he was a very animated guy. And, everybody in New York at the time in New York, he was the guy who you'd go to really refine how to make a great sound. And I mean, there were professionals flying in from, other places, other countries, pretty known people would come in and play for him for this reason. But, everyone would joke, it's like, man, if I could just take Dolph with me into the audition, I'd be unstoppable. If I could do that, it was like drugs, you'd go get a fix and then yeah, I got it. I can do anything. And then, it would sort of slowly wear off and then you'd have to go back and get another fix,
I frequently used to think that when I would leave Dolph too, but then I would sober up.
But it was, he really was amazing. I mean, I think in a way he could teach the idea of efficiency and balance better maybe than anyone I've worked with. And he actually could teach it. Most of the people who make an unbelievable sound, a lot of them that I ran into, you'd go play for them and they didn't really know how they did it. That was just kind of what was in their head. I mean, the most famous one, I when I was playing with the London Symphony, I got to hang out with Morris Murphy. And he was just the quintessential talent. He was famous for refusing to teach because playing the trumpet was the simple part of his day. People would ask him, Morris, how do you think about sound? And it's like, well, you blow in the mouthpiece and then it comes out the bell. How do you think about phrasing? Well, I don't know. I put the music on the stand and then I play it, it's
sure.
And, I mean, this guy was just, once in 100 years talent, but he wasn't, and it's not that he didn't work hard. He worked very hard too, but he didn't have to reverse engineer anything. He wasn't analytical. It was in him and he just had to work to bring it out. And Jim was one of those people who he actually understood. He could tell you no, here's what you need to do this. And here's what you're actually doing. And here's what I can tell that you're thinking about. And you need to think about this. And here's what I think you're feeling. And you need to make it so you feel this. And that was amazing. It was just an incredible resource.
Wow. Cool stuff. Yeah. What a guy. What a guy. We're going to have him on the podcast. And I actually, I texted him to ask him if he wanted to be on the show. And I then got a voicemail an hour later.
I was going to say, how can you text Dolph?
Well, I wasn't really thinking. I had a 5 minute, I had 5 minutes in between lessons. So I texted him to see if he wanted to be on the show. And then I get a voicemail 4 hours later when I had a break. He said, Hitz, I'm blind, asshole. I can't read text messages. If you want me, call my telephone. And then he hung up.
I can hear him saying that.
It was
that's so funny.
That's on me. Oh yeah, that's right. You can't see. Yeah, I do remember.
Sorry.
Yep. Sorry about that. So. But when we did talk, he was laughing hysterically at what an ass I was to text him. He's like, yeah, my wife read it to me. It's he's like, yeah, she'll read me one, but she's not going to just sit there and text for me because you can't pick up a phone. I was like, fair enough. Yeah, that's reasonable. So, speaking of famous trumpet players, I'm sure that you have encountered out there on the West Coast, because Seattle and LA are pretty close together, that you've encountered Jens Lindemann.
Absolutely. Yes, I have.
So you're probably aware of the horrible chop problems that. How long has this been going on now, Lance? For 2.5 years?
Yeah, exactly.
3 years?
It's been going for a while. Yeah. I mean,
89 episodes. Yeah, and that's every other week. So that's 190 weeks. So yeah, it's been a long time. Yeah, I guess we're coming up on 4 years now.
I can't imagine. I mean, what that guy's gone through. I mean, to be such a virtuoso and just get reduced to playing like a third grader for so long. I mean, I don't know how he handles it. But I gotta say, I commend his perseverance, and I mean, it takes a real indomitable spirit to get up every morning and practice when you sound like that.
I like that you chose third grader, since where we grew up, you started trumpet in the fourth grade. So yeah, that's pretty good. That's pretty good, man. That was very specific. So in this, the really sad part is at this point, he's had advice from Ryan Anthony, Joe Alessi, Marty Hackelman, none of it has helped. So maybe you're a philosophy major at an Ivy League school as well. So you're a real thinker, and you won like 9 auditions before you turned 16. Yeah. And so like all of this, I mean, you've got the pedigree here to put it all together. So what does Jens need to do to help get him over the hump?
You know, I think what he actually needs is he needs a smaller mouthpiece. That's all he needs. I mean, Jens, he's so famous for playing these enormous mouthpieces. You know, he's playing like a number 2 throat or something. I mean, you know, you look down it, it's like, you know, it's like a cave. You can't see the bottom. You know, and he, you know, all he's thinking about is blowing as hard as he can. You know, sort of. He has this real tubby, woofy concept. So, you know, I think if he can finally find a little bit of efficiency in his playing, you know, it's just like he's trying to bench press 800 pounds every time he plays a middle C. So that's what I'd say to Jens. You know, if he can find a little bit, even any focus in his playing, then I think that might be a good point of departure.
Even any. Like that. Even up to including any.
Tubby woofy approach. I was like, well, yeah, hey, you're 90% of the way towards being a professional tuba player at that point. Yeah, so yep. Then you just need a little bit of luck, and then you're famous. So
absolutely.
There you go. That was good. A middle C, and he's trying to bench press 800 pounds. I like it. That was good, David. That was very good.
You know, do what you can.
So we are going to have you hang on here, and we're going to have you join us for a little bit of the bonus episode where we're going to dig a little bit deeper into
like
exactly
rubber glove deeper, like
I might share a high school David Gordon story or two, you know. So we'll. But that'll be for our Patreon patrons, so they can find that at patreon.com/thebrassjunkies. But this has been awesome. It's so great to catch up with you. It's been a long time since we've seen each other. About a decade, I think, is what we were figuring out was the last time that I saw you when I was passing through Seattle with Boston Brass. So it's great to talk to you.
Totally great to talk to you as well. It's been way too long, and it's an honor to be on the program, and totally great to catch up with you and Lance. Great to meet you.
Yeah, it feels like 50 years since I've seen you.
Yeah, something like that, man. I don't know. How old are you?
40. Yeah, 40. Yeah, there you go. So, all right. Well, that is going to do it for another episode of The Brass Junkies.
You've been listening to The Brass Junkies on the Pedal Note Media Podcast Network. If you would like to hear the bonus episode featuring today's guest, please visit patreon.com/thebrassjunkies to learn how you can support the show and instantly access all bonus materials, as well as gain access to a special patron-only Facebook group. The Brass Junkies is produced by the amazing, wonderful, and truly inspirational Will Houchin. The theme music was composed by Fernando Dados and performed by Andrew Hitz and Lance LaDuke. We are at Pray for Jens on Twitter and Instagram and have a Facebook page at facebook.com/prayforjens. You can find out more about the Brass Junkies and all the other Pedal Note Media podcasts at pedalnotemedia.com. This has been a presentation of the Pedal Note Media Podcast Network.